Welcome back, everybody, to my continued trek through the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. I am now into Volume 2. Yes, this is not Volume 2, this is Volume 1, but I don't have a physical copy of Volume 2 to hold in my hands because 7 Cs. But anyways, I did read it digitally. I have been enjoying it. I will say, going into Volume 2, I'm surprised with just how little I can really get into with certain subjects just because of how... yeah, pretty on the spot the anime adaptation was. Now, there's still some differences here, but yeah, I guess to get the obvious warnings out of the way for anybody that has not been watching my coverage of the novel series up until this point, this is coming from a perspective of somebody that has watched the first season of Mushoku Tensei, so I will reference things in the anime. This is really the perspective I'm giving, is somebody that has watched the anime. Differences that I see, emphasis that the novel series gives that unfortunately was lost with the anime adaptation, and all that kind of stuff. But without further ado, let's jump into Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation Volume 2. Kicking off Volume 2, obviously we have a prelude where we get a little bit of insight, a little bit of a jump forward, giving a goofy perspective of Rudy being chased by a monster. And yeah, I think most people reading this that know about the story know this is obviously talking about Eris. But it's a really goofy way to start the story, just to kind of say how he's being chased down by this crazy monster. And oh yeah, let's get you all caught up on exactly how I got here. But yes, Chapter 1 kicking off with a basic idea that yes, the Rudy is going to Roa. He's going to be training both Eris, who is the daughter of this family, this noble family, as well as Ghislaine, who is this sword king that he is going to be training as well. He's going to be training them in arithmetic, basically math, writing, also magic as well, obviously, and that's what we get. The joke later on is seemingly all Eris cares about. But the interesting thing that I'm already seeing with this first chapter is describing exactly what Rudy is seeing. I always appreciated with how the adaptation was doing with the series was that anywhere there was a point in which you would have to get described the area in which you're kind of being set in, the anime would always kind of have the OP give that layout. You would kind of see the music would be playing for the OP, but you would see like a layout of the area that he's going into or the area that he's currently in. So it gives you a visual idea. But in the novel, it's obviously describing the idea that they're going past these huge walls. They're coming in. Rudy is pointing out the area in which all these travelers are stopping at, which is obviously a checkpoint for people to enter the city, whereas because they're a part of this carriage, they're able to enter without having to stop. It was funny that that Ghislaine thought that he was making fun of her. He's like, are you making fun of me? And he's like, no, I really don't know what this is. And she's like, oh, realizing that he's about to cry, she's like, okay, well, let me explain it to you. Yeah, getting into how pretty much everything's kind of run down. There's shops and stuff, but things get more and more fancy the further they get in, which is obvious because if they were being attacked, most of the people that are in the center are going to be the more higher, richer, nobler families, rather than everybody on the outside that would be the first to be struck if they were to be attacked. But this leads to them arriving at the Boreas estate, which I like how Rudy is asking, so is this the Lord's daughter that I'm going to be training? Is she like this princess or whatever? And the entire time Ghislaine's like, no, not quite. No, like she's trying to set Rudy's expectations before they even arrive at the place. But it was interesting, the difference here in the novel is that when Rudy first arrives in there, he actually meets Saros first. We didn't really get to meet Saros until later. But Saros obviously being the grandfather of Eris, obviously the liege lord of this area, and his immediate response is, that was a terrible introduction. Like, Rudy introduces himself and he's like, that's not how you introduce yourself. And it was interesting because Rudy immediately doesn't make excuses. Again, this is this new idea that Rudy has in this new world, is he's not going to give excuses or try to sidestep things. He immediately apologized and said, okay, like, how do I do this properly, basically? And Saros attaches himself to that. He basically, Rudy gets a pass. He passes the test, basically, because unlike his father, who would constantly make excuses, Rudy accepts it and says, okay, well, I'll try to do better, basically. And that's all that Saros needs, then to know that he's not Paul, basically. But yeah, following this, Philip comes in. And the interesting thing that I need to note here is that they're laying out that obviously Rudy's going to have difficulty. Like, they're already placing into Rudy's head that Eris is going to be a difficult target. They've been through plenty of tutors. But the interesting thing here to note is that Rudy's already planning the kidnapping. Like, before he even meets Eris, he's already planning that they might need to do a kidnapping just to gain her trust. So he's already laying it out to Philip. Well, if it doesn't work out, I have a plan. Oh, what's that plan? We're going to have us kidnapped, and that way, trusting my knowledge and trusting in the magic and stuff will kind of entice her to want to learn under me. And so again, they're already placing it here. But obviously, Philip does have his... Similar to Saros, Philip does have his sort of hesitation with Rudy and the fact that, again, he's technically Paul's son, and asking the idea that if he's going to seduce Eris. And he's like, I already know that you have a girl back home, and this is where they note the idea that technically how long he's going to be away, Sylvie will be older, and that Paul might seduce Sylvie. But in Philip's mind, I guess this is where they're technically establishing Paul's taste, and they're kind of pointing out that he probably won't. Well, why is that? Well, Paul likes more older, attractive, more pronounced women, not younger looking. And technically, Sylph being sort of partially elf, she's obviously not going to mature body-like that quickly. But still, Rudy is afraid of adding Sylphie to his harem. Cutting forward, the whole meeting with Eris pretty much lays out the same. You know, he does introduce himself. It does put a lot more emphasis on the idea of this bestial woman that's chasing him around, the fact that he's constantly having to heal himself and all that. But the interesting thing is, it's a very different aftermath to this meeting. Again, technically, we already pre-established that he was going to do the kidnapping. He goes and meets her, gets the crap beat out of him. He returns, and they do acknowledge, okay, we're going to do this plan. We're going to have us kidnapped. But then he returns to his chambers. And this is where we get a very interesting perspective into Rudy, in the fact that despite the fact that he feels beaten and bruised, he does equate it to his previous life when he was beaten and bruised by his family and kicked out. He knows that this is different. Despite the fact that he's drawing parallels here, he still wants to acknowledge that things are different now. He actually appreciates... This is another one of those moments where he's lifting Paul up once again. We keep getting these moments where he does acknowledge Paul did right. Paul is helping him. Paul didn't just kick him out. He's acknowledging, like, oh, over here, I was kicked out. I wasn't given any money. I wasn't given any chance to find a job. They didn't give me any time to find something. Again, still acknowledging that it's partly his fault. But then over here, he's acknowledging, no, Paul didn't just kick me out. He gave me money. He gave me a job. He gave me opportunities, a place to stay. I'm not out on the streets. Everything that Paul has done is something that my previous family never gave me, even though, again, he technically acknowledges that even if they did give me anything back then in my previous life, probably still would have screwed it up anyways. So he's not giving excuses for his previous life circumstances, but he is equating it and acknowledging that Paul did so much better for him. Paul gave him a chance. Gave him a stable job, everything he needs to technically make his own living. And acknowledging, this time, I'm going to work for my money. Like, I'm going to do this right. Like, he's not going to give up on the idea of Eris. And again, technically throughout this entire build up to him winning over Eris, he's constantly saying, I just don't want to go back to Paul a failure. I don't want to do that. But yeah, he does acknowledge the idea that, I like how they put it in the light novel. But sending me to deal with this creature, she's like a pressure cooker that's exploding. It's like, that's one way to put it. He's like, enough to give you PTSD. Starting off in chapter 2, I like how they did lay out the plan, like, thoroughly. Like, they gave us a full lowdown. It wasn't just cut to them being captured. Our whole idea was they would go to a clothing store together. At some point, Ghislaine would just be distracted. And in Eris's true nature, she'll want to run off. Because apparently, Eris really loved going to the Adventurer Guild. She loved going there and looking at the adventures, because she always wants to do that. She wants to become an adventurer. So after Ghislaine looks away, Eris runs off. He'll follow her, and at some point, somebody from the mansion will show up. Them distracted, they'll get knocked out and taken to a neighboring village where they will then have to escape with magic. So again, it's kind of laying out the whole process they're doing. Now, it's after being captured that I was a little bit upset. This is one of those things where I'm kind of happy the anime adaptation adapted it the way it did. Not once, but twice, Eris gets the crap beat out of her. Initially, it has pretty much, he wakes her up, she starts screaming, the guys come in to the prison cell where they're kept, and they beat the living crap out of Eris. Now, following them leaving and taking a hit at Rudy as well because of the smirk that was on his face, because obviously he was kind of, oh yeah, we're working together, right? After the guy leaves, he, of course, heals Eris. recovers her, gets her back to normal, but then she starts yelling again. So the guys come back in and beat the crap out of her again, like breaking ribs and everything. Now, the interesting thing that comes from this is he does, similar to the anime at this point, he does heal her, but not all the way. He's like, if I heal you all the way, you're just going to scream again, and they're going to come back in, they're going to beat the crap out of you again. But additionally, they get into how the bandits that have captured them, he listens to their conversation. They're kind of debating what they want to do with Eris and Rudy. And again, this was something that was kind of touched on the anime. They were kind of mentioning the idea of, you know, we just need the boy probably. The boy's just fine. We can get rid of the girl. It's fine. But no, they're talking about there's two options. They can sell them off to somebody else, you know, as slavery or something like that, or they can use them as collateral, like a ransom to the Boreas family. Like they have an option. They're not really sure exactly which one they want to do. Obviously, there is a lot of difficulties that will come in them doing a ransom, whereas the other way is more safer, but they'll get paid less. So this leads to the escape. Now, the interesting thing is that additionally, on top of barricading the actual door with earth magic like they do in the anime, additionally, he uses fire and earth to melt the frame of the door and the doorknob so they couldn't even open the door. And again, additionally, a lot of emphasis at this point that Eris is terrified. Like he's noting the idea that in this escape, as he's kind of leading her on, like, you know, you're not going to yell or anything. You're going to do what I tell you, and she won't answer. He hears the fear that is in her voice as they're trying to bust down this barricade. Now, the travel itself was significantly different in the novel. In addition to obviously them making this agreement that she's not going to yell, he does go to leave her behind because she won't agree to it, and then he leaves her behind. She hears the sounds of the guys chasing them, and so she obviously goes to follow after him, agreeing to not scream or anything like that. But the cool thing is here is we're already in their travels establishing a lot of things. Again, in the anime, they did establish that she couldn't read signs for the stagecoach or anything like that, but he's adding additional things into the mix as well. Obviously, it's not just about her not being able to read and enticing her to want to learn how to read afterwards, but additionally how to handle money, how to handle change, stuff like that. And how they do that is that he has to figure out where the stagecoaches are going, where they're currently located. They're currently 2 villages away, which, again, in the anime, they traveled once. They went from the place they were at to their home. Here, they have to travel to another village, stay at an inn, and then travel home. So we're getting in a sense that she's going to have to learn not just how to read things, but additionally, he's trying to instill upon her the desire to know how to handle money. And he's doing this by explaining that we're going to stop at an inn. And if we don't know how to handle our money, they'll rip us off with our change. So to understand money and all this kind of stuff, you're going to avoid running out of money before we can get home. Because if they do rip us off with our change, we won't have money to get home. And yeah, they technically did have a scene where she decides to keep him in the stall so that she can use the restroom because she's terrified. Well, they hide in a restroom, and then she doesn't want him to leave, so there's that. So they travel to the next village, and when they arrive there, again, like I mentioned, they do have to stay at an inn. And it was interesting here because at this point, another lesson that he's trying to instill upon Eris is not always getting luxury. And so how he does that, he decides to stay at like the most rundown inn possible, like straw beds and everything. And it notes the idea that the entire night, Eris didn't really sleep because she was terrified the entire time their attackers would come. So any creak, which it being a rundown inn probably creaks a bunch, she was constantly leaping up and looking to the door because she was that terrified of her situation. It gives a little more levity to the situation given to Eris and why she went from the initial point of basically saying, I don't care, I never agreed to anything, I'll do what I want, and Rudy almost leaving her behind, to the point now where she's basically terrified of even arriving home safe. I guess given enough time for the situation to really sink into her. Enough to the point that when they do finally arrive back in their hometown, Roa, she's at that point no longer screaming. She's no longer doing anything. Now, I say that, but I was a little bit miffed at the idea that it kind of emphasized a little more in the anime, this idea that she is following his direction. Because the moment they arrive home in the anime, they capture, they run by and they grab Eris and they run down an alleyway. And in the anime adaptation, she's essentially holding her mouth shut. Like, she doesn't want to scream. And it's emphasizing the idea that she's following his direction. Like, after everything, she will not cry out, which is technically in both cases in the very end when they arrive home, she asks, can I now talk? And he allows it. In the novel, it's more pushing at the idea that they were so quick, they captured Eris and they gagged her within seconds. Like, these are professionals. It's more moving it from her choosing to not scream, to follow his orders, to her just being gagged because these guys are very skilled at what they're doing, which is taking hostages. But here was the most interesting thing I think about probably the first 2 chapters. The most interesting thing that I found in the novel versus the anime is the encounter with Rudy and the bandits. It played out significantly different in the novel, and the idea that when he first arrives, obviously he does his earth magic, stops them in their place, and they start conversing. And this is the point in which Rudy is starting up a fire attack. He's going to attack them, all that kind of stuff. And they're obviously offering him a choice. Hey, you're a smart kid. You know money. You talk very adult. Like, they're pointing out the fact that Rudy handles himself and talks very adult. They almost thought that he was actually a bodyguard, but then realizing his age, he can't be. But they're noting the idea that because he acts so adult, because he acts more mature than his age looks, they assume that he's a demon, or he's part demon in some way. That there's something that's keeping him from looking like a 37-year-old or 34-year-old, even though he acts like one. And I thought that was kind of very interesting. Like, it's another one of those cases where somebody doesn't really quite understand why Rudy is the way he is. Like, you shouldn't be that mature, but you are. But additionally, as he's building up his magic and stuff like that to fight back, in the anime, it makes it out as if he purposely chose to shoot the fireball in the air to signal. But in the novel, because they had Eris in their arms, they pulled the blade to her neck and told him, do not fire off that spell. We'll cut her before it even arrives to us. So he has no choice but to deflect it. Now, the interesting thing is the bandits don't understand how magic works and that he could cancel it. So they don't tell him to cancel it. Instead, they tell him to fire it into the air. So it's technically by their choice, they get ended by Ghislaine. Like, they don't understand that he can cancel it, but instead he signals to Ghislaine technically, and that makes her arrive and just, yeah, basically one-shot them in an instant blink of an eye. But it was kind of interesting to see that. It all kind of plays out the same. He does eventually reach Eris, pull her to safety, get away from them. Again, the guy technically throwing his sword, which is kind of hit on later on, this idea that Ghislaine mentioning that no matter what, these are kind of people that no matter what, they will fight to the death. They're not going to stop. It's that sword style. But like I said, very interesting, the differences that I kind of found in Chapter 2, especially at this period right here, because I think everything up until this point wasn't really showing me anything different. Things were kind of oddly differently placed, but this was like the first point where it kind of gotten some interesting stuff here. Very significant differences from the anime. The other weird difference that I found was, obviously they get back. Eris says, okay, you're going to be my tutor, and he's excited, but he got it accepted. Then we have this whole point in which Soros comes out and says, Rudy, I want you to teach Eris. And obviously Rudy's like, no, that's a bad thing. We can't do that. She needs to say it. And obviously Soros kind of like, you're second guessing me? Okay, well, that's true. We should have her ask you herself. So he yells out for Eris. Eris comes down there, and this is funny because they kind of had the same thought process with the adaptation. It really did have this feeling that Eris was... She initially comes in and says, please teach me. And then Soros says, that's not how you do it, Eris. And then Eris goes, okay, does the whole pigtail thing, and then goes, teach me meow or whatever. But don't teach me arithmetic. I don't need arithmetic. Don't teach me writing. I don't need anything else. Just magic meow. And it was funny because the way they kind of portrayed it in the novel is that it's similar. Like this idea that this is kind of odd, but it's goofy. In the anime, it was very goofy, and it was off-putting to Rudy, but the way it's kind of describing it is that Eris is doing this whole thing, but the entire time he sees like daggers coming out of her eyes. Like she's doing this, but at the same time, she's embarrassed and angry, and he feels it. Like it's so unsettling to him seeing this. But additionally, he sees it as being very weird. He's like, so wait, does all Boreas ask questions like this? Or do we all ask favors the same way? And Soros was like, heck no, a man must ask properly. But apparently the females, this is what they want. And sure enough, he thinks that Philip is going to reprimand them. Like, okay, Philip's coming. Hopefully Philip will tell her that this is not how you do it. And sure enough, Philip walks up and says, you need to make sure you push your hips out more. It's more attractive. He's just like, these people are just wrong. And it follows this whole thing up with him going, and after that, I reprimanded the Boreas family, and they got rid of the tradition of asking for favors that way. It's like, wait, so Rudy managed to get them to not do this anymore? It's kind of, I don't know. I mean, Soros did agree to him when he did, state that Eris needs to ask this way. But again, that's, I guess, the idea of him allowing it because he wants what Eris wants. So, in spoiling her, basically. But yeah, that was kind of goofy. But anyway, that's the first 2 chapters of the second volume of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. There's some really exciting stuff coming up in chapter 3 and onward, including getting into the history of Paul's party, and later on getting into a lot of stuff surrounding the entire history of this entire area, the entire world itself, which I was completely shocked that popped up. So I hope you guys will join me for those later volumes, or at least later chapters of the second volume. Definitely appreciate you guys' support as always. As always, if you can, please make sure to share out this video to other people. Help me get eyes on it. I definitely enjoy this series, and I'm loving the build-up and the passion that people have with me doing this entire project. So it's been, your guys' support has definitely been driving me to continue on with this, and I definitely appreciate it. Additionally, if you guys want to support us more, we have a Patreon link and a tips link in the description below. We also should have our super thanks available on the actual YouTube video as well, so you can support us that way as well. But I thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and y'all take care.